And welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel for our weekend Q&As, part one of our two-part Q&As. Tonight we are going, we started a little late. I was setting up a new tripod with a backdoor light so that I can actually have better lighting and it looks a little bit more professional, a little more detail. So I guess we went from SD, Friendly Neighborhood History, to HD, Friendly Neighborhood History. And let me show you what I mean real there so you see the change in mode of the light. So I got one of those lights behind for selfies and things like that, with a nice new tripod and everything, so that we have clearer, better light for you guys every time we do these live streams. And we do these live streams, like I mentioned, every Friday and Saturday night, where you guys can ask anything you want about history, social studies, any topic of the matter, and I will bring you the best possible answers and the best possible commentary that I can give. Any topics, questions, or comments you want to make regarding history, social studies, geopolitics, past and present, geography, the humanities, that's what we do here. That's what we love here. That's what being part of the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel is. And being part of the channel, becoming a friendly neighborhood historian, is as easy as liking and subscribing. Checking out some of that short form content, long form content that we do here on the channel all the time, as we're here for you to bring you as much fun and interesting history as we possibly can. And I am on the mend. I was really sick last week. We've been doing, without interruption, 3 live streams a weekend for probably a couple of months now. And then last Saturday, I even did a live stream. But last Saturday night, the flu really took me hard. I was out cold Sunday. I felt a little bit better Monday, but not well enough to be on here for an hour. And by the time it was Tuesday, I was like, we're already close enough to the next week, so why don't we just pick this up later on and jump in when we get there, and just go back to our normal, regular, Friendly Neighborhood History channel live streams. And I will do an extra live stream on Monday to make up for the live stream from last week, where I will discuss the history of the Roman Republic. So you are at the beginning of a 4-part live stream weekend. We always do 3 parts, but to make up for last week, we're doing 4, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday and Saturday, enjoy the live stream Q&A. Start your weekend off right by asking me some questions about history before you go out and enjoy your evening, and then continue that up Saturday. Keep your weekend going with those good vibes. And then the Sunday before Christmas, I'll be doing a live stream lecture about the history, themes, and messages of Christmas throughout the years. What is it? How did it become a holiday? How did it become the most popular holiday? Who's Santa Claus? All of those things. I'll be talking about all the important Christmas tropes and ideas and the history behind them. So everything that I can possibly do to bring as much historical information to you guys then. And then Sunday, that's Sunday, talking about the history of Santa and all other Christmas stories and the obsession around Christmas. And then Monday, I will be making up that live stream where I'll be talking about the history of the Roman Republic. So join me Monday. I will be back with live streams next week, after that Monday, after the holiday passes, with our normal weekly schedule. So enjoy 4 live streams in a row instead of 3 live streams in a row. I'll be doing a video about the history of Christmas as well as the history of Hanukkah. Hanukkah starts on Christmas night as the Jewish day begins at sundown. And when sundown begins, officially a new day has begun in the Hebrew calendar. That is how it works for Judaism and how it has worked for Judaism for thousands of years. So, anyways, so this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and any questions, comments, topics you want to bring up, feel free to drop them in the chat. That is what we will be doing for the next about hour or so. And I hope you are enjoying better audio, because I just got a new iPhone, and I hope you are enjoying better visual quality and video quality, more high def, if you would, with our new lighting system. And just hope you're enjoying the feed as well, and we'll get into the history very soon. Also, I will have a newer, I will be using a mic starting tomorrow, trying to improve the quality of the channels and not just rely on me speaking into my iPhone microphone all the time. And you will be able to tell that on my videos as well as on channel. So hopefully that makes everything better. And moderation in the chat has certainly improved ever since we got Simon the Bunny. We've been doing these live streams ever since the summer, where I decided to give back to my fans by doing an hour live Q&A on Saturday afternoons. And it turned out to be pretty successful, and people really seemed to enjoy it. And they enjoyed it so much, they asked if we could do Sundays as well, and we started doing Sundays. So we had Saturdays and Sundays. And I noticed that the topics I wanted to discuss during these live streams I never could get to because everybody had so many great questions. And so because of that, we decided to start doing a live stream lecture. And so a couple months ago, we started, and we were uninterrupted until I got sick last week, a Sunday live stream lecture in the afternoons. And that's good. So join us tomorrow for another part of a Q&A at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then Sunday at 4. But yes, we have great viewer engagement. We have great things. So that is what we will be doing. I know I'm late getting in. Please be sure to join and follow us, not just here, but on social media. My social media handles are in the chat for you guys to check out. I hope the sound quality, Simon the Bunny, our wonderful moderator here as always, make sure to show him some love in the chat. I hope our sound quality and lighting quality by your standards has improved, because I always love the good feedback and support from you as well. So, and we do have wonderful viewer engagement, and global solidarity definitely helps make that a thing. So if you have a topic or a question you want to ask regarding history and social studies, please drop it in the chat and I will get to it. And Simon's already got a great one. How have different cultures historically interpreted the winter solstice? What significance did it hold in ancient civilizations? So that's what I'm going to be talking about more on Sunday. But as the winter solstice has always been this time where people were huddled around the fire, they understood it was the shortest night of the year. They understood that the seasons were changing and that bitter colds were setting in, and it was a time for gathering together and trying to survive bitter and difficult times, relying on the harvest that you just got from your crops to be able to survive. So every culture, to one extent or another, has interpreted the winter solstice as a period of huge change and extreme importance. And so it shows that ancient people were very well aware of the ability of the seasons to change, and that there would be these seasonal changes at particular periods. And so Christmas in its most ancient form was celebrated by Celtic and barbarian tribes in northwestern Europe, Germany, France, and the British Isles, as a winter solstice festival and a celebration of Celtic gods. And that was eventually commandeered by the church and turned into a celebration. Yes, you can have your winter solstice celebration, but it needs to be about a Christian figure, not a pagan figure. And so the church decided to reinvent it as the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth was not born on December 25th. There's no historical evidence that he was born on December 25th. There is obviously no historical evidence that he was born in a manger with a star hanging over him. The star tradition comes from scholars and commentators in ancient of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, who said that a star was put in the sky when Abraham and when Moses and when David were born. And since it was that so for those important figures, it must be the same for Jesus of Nazareth, who the Christians believe to be the Messiah. So the reappropriation of ancient pagan practices of celebrating the changes of seasons and either the harvest or the freeze or things like this was reappropriated by the church as Christianity started to take a higher place and people started to convert to it. They wanted to keep the celebrations and the practices, and so it was given to Christmas. And you had shepherds in fields in December, probably not very likely, and maybe even in that area of the world. So it is not extraordinarily likely that Jesus of Nazareth was born on Christmas Day. Now, the story of the shepherds in the manger, that's all part of the tradition necessarily. And of course, that's part of the gospel accounts. Him being born, the exact date of his birth is not part of the gospel accounts. The exact year of it isn't even part of the gospel accounts. And a lot of questions have been asked about how reliable his birth account and narrative actually are. So anyways, that's insert any country for the placeholder. But basically my whole point there, Simon, and I hope that answers your question, is that the culture of that time period was throughout the entire world was very open and conducive to celebrations of the winter solstice. And as Christianity became the common religion in that part of the world, the winter solstice became a celebration of the birth of Christ, Christmas. So it's a replacement for the winter solstice, but it's for a celebration of the winter solstice, for a winter festival, but it is not a winter festival. It is a celebration of the birth of someone who they believe to be a god. which there are some ancient deities who also supposedly had their births around the winter solstice. Mithra is a good example of this. So there have been parallels drawn between the birth of Jesus and the birth of other figures from other different religions. So, anyway, Simon, that's just a short answer, and I'll get more into that, and you're going to hear me say the same exact thing again with more detail on Sunday when I talk about the history of Christmas. Mena was asking about, do I support Palestine? And I'm just going to read the chat while drinking some water because I'm very thirsty. But if you like what you're learning about, if you really enjoy learning about history, especially friendly neighborhood history, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel to grow. Yes, Mena, some Israelis aren't good people, though, and some Palestinians are not good people, though. There are not good people on both sides. Do I support rabbit season? I don't know if I support rabbit season or not. I don't know what you mean by rabbit season. I'm moving my coat over. But let me see here. Yeah, the eclipses are obviously extremely important. So whatever aerial phenomenon that was happening, be they a lunar eclipse, a solar eclipse, blood moons, the waxing and waning, the gibbous moons, those were obviously extremely important to the development of their religious understanding, because for them this was the gods at work. Because if something is happening to the moon, there's obviously something that pertains to the moon god or the god of the sky, and you have to obviously start to question that. So Thoth was the god of the sky in Egyptian mythology, so obviously movements and effects upon the moon would obviously be in his category, in his camp. Yeah, I've been growing it out. I haven't really shaved this week. So I intend to fully do that, to shave and get a haircut very soon so that I'm more trimmed up and neat and clean for the holidays. But the beard is a little bit of a touch, a little bit of a difference. I grow out one a year usually, and usually it's in November. I don't shave in November, but I never got around to it, and I thought it wasn't going to happen. But I guess I decided to get a little scruffy before I get a haircut and change everything. So I wouldn't say the world was much more magical, but it was much more open to what we call superstitions today were accepted religious traditions and practices then. And this is something to understand about history in general. The past is a foreign country with different practices, customs, and religions and languages. And so the people there are not going to think, act, or behave the way that you or I would in a situation, because they have all of these different mechanisms that they answer to, just like we have mechanisms we answer to. Which historical figures had the best beard? I think you got to look at some of the early Russian czars, the Orthodox patriarchs of the Eastern Orthodox Church. I think those really long beards, really intimidating. I think Saladin and some of the Muslim conquerors had incredibly great beards. I don't know if I would say one in particular. I think Lincoln's is obviously the most recognizable. John Calvin, people like that, had really long, goatish ones that were very, very inspiring. So. And yes, alchemy is another example of that. That was their science. That was their chemistry back then. And Muslims, yes, definitely have great beards. They know how to rock it. It's very interesting that the people of the Middle East would be so good at creating beards that help them feel cooler despite the heat, because perhaps it retains the cool. I think it might retain the coolness in their faces, and make it harder for heat to get in. Yes, I mean, and that's just part of how religion is. You build, and by the way, the building of temples in the mountains is not insignificant, because you build temples, you build palaces, you build places high up so that you can oversee the human world, but you can also look up and get closer to the divine world. So this was a political move, a social move, and a religious move. It was political and social in that it exerted your power, especially if you were nobility or a ruler, to be above everybody else, so that they must look up to you, so that they must rely on you the same way they look up to and rely on the gods. And also you oversee everything, and you see the enemy when they are coming. But getting higher up, you are closer to the gods. You are more considered to be closer to their presence and more constantly in their presence and more easily in their presence. So obviously, you must be in the right religiously and politically and socially. And one thing that's really, really interesting that I find fascinating is that if you study this is the case not just in China, or even the pyramids could be this, or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. There were pyramids in Central and South America. Look at how the Inca built their cities, like Machu Picchu and Cusco. They built it in the hills, yes, to get closer to gods, but building it encased in the mountains with terraced farms allowed them to see their enemy coming and to have the ability to defend themselves more effectively. So what the Europeans did with castles, the Incas did with their geography and topography. Yeah, thank you, Joa. I try to do my best. Yeah, Blackbeard. Edward Teach was a renegade English captain. The Queen Anne's Revenge. He had several other ships in his employ. Really only pirated for like 2 or 3 years. Was even thinking about quitting, but was just too committed and was too worried about how he would be punished. And eventually, Captain Robert Maynard was able to board his ship and kill him. So, I don't think of Lincoln with his hat that often. He didn't wear it that often. Most of the pictures I have of Lincoln and use on this channel all the time, I made a video today about Samuel Mudd, who was the doctor who hid John Wilkes Booth after he shot Lincoln and broke his leg, and who treated Booth with his broken leg, where we get the expression, your name is Mudd from. But Lincoln, none of the pictures I had there have Lincoln with his beard, but go check out, or with his hat, go check it out. Lincoln didn't even have a beard until 1860. He grew it because a girl in Illinois, where he was from, wrote him a letter saying he would look better with one, and he does look extremely better, much better with one. Lincoln was not known for being handsome or good looking. Someone once accused him of being two-faced, and he said, if I was really two-faced, would I be wearing this one? So, he didn't wear the hat that often. I mean, and if he wore it, it wasn't any more often than anyone else. It was the common fashion for upper class people to wear top hats back then. Yeah, and you imagine the daguerreotype. Daguerreotype, yep. Yeah, we think of a hat, but he didn't really wear it that often. As a child, I imagined him with a hat. Yes, we're getting up there. We're at 5720, which is not bad. I wanted to get us to 6,000. We may not reach that by the end of the year, but that's okay. I'm just amazed. We've been at this less than a year. We'll be a year by President's Day. By then, we'll be at 6,000 subscribers. And that's going to be, and we'll be well over 6,000 subscribers, headed towards 7,500. And I'm really, really looking forward to that. And that's what I really appreciate. We've got an amazing fan base. We have people who come here every week. And yet we've got thousands of people out there that are friendly neighborhood historians who come to the channel when they want, they watch the content when they want, and they just support us and make us a bigger and bigger phenomenon. And if you want to support us, and if you like learning about history, and you like asking questions, and you want these live streams to keep going, and all of that great stuff, like and subscribe. It really helps the channel to grow. That's how you become a friendly neighborhood historian. What is the most underrated historical site? I think it's the Mogao Caves in China. There's hundreds of them, and they are all extremely oriented. I don't know much about the Mogao. I need to learn more about it. Underrated historical sites. I think a lot of people do not pay attention to the deserts or the mountains and the topography and geography of China, or how much of China is farmland, and how vast China is, and how large of a country China actually is, because it's next to Russia, which is huge. But China is actually an extremely large country. I think it's the second or third biggest in land. No, Canada's the second and biggest in land size, then the US, then China's somewhere. But it's a big country. There's a lot of space, and the vast majority of people in Chinese history have been farmers. And when you think of China and you think of its history, you don't think of farming, but farming was the biggest part of life in China, ancient and modern. Yeah. Firmament or ozone layer? Both. Are there any separatist movements that have clout in the USA, seeing as Canada has Quebecois and Europe has several? It's amazing how harmonious America is, considering it was formed powerful countries. Well, yeah, it's not just that. It's that we've had our fractious positions. So Canada has never had a civil war like the United States has. Now, all the European countries have had multiple civil wars, so the United States is not unique there. The Spanish had one, the French had one. There have been several between Spain and Portugal. Italy has had civil wars as well, or at least political upheaval. France, Britain, Russia, Germany all have had civil wars. The United States, Germany not really, but Germany didn't really exist until the 19th century. The German people have had civil wars in their history. The United States has had one civil war, and because factions did not manage to tear the country apart, it's been able to remain intact. So I don't know, there are no major separatist movements in the United States. However, I think a lot of people who think that the United States is stolen land, who cite the Native Americans' dispossession of their land as genocide, and who think that the United States has had a fundamentally evil effect upon the world. I think a lot of those people who are on the left side of history tend to think that have an anti-American perspective on history, have an anti-American historiography. I think a lot of those people would prefer if the United States broke apart and didn't exist in the form that it does today. Yeah. And but you have had states join since the Civil War. Yeah, we've had plenty. In fact, the state of West Virginia was created because of the Civil War, because the West Virginians did not want to fight for the Confederacy, and so they broke off, and that's why West Virginia exists. And it didn't bother to get back together again because it was culturally different, which is why they had broken off in the first place. And waiting for a comment on the German attack this evening. Yeah, I heard about that in Marburg, Germany, one of the most important historical cities in Germany, Marburg. But 65 people injured, 2 dead, showing a lot of tensions within German culture now between non-German peoples who have immigrated and settled in that region with a different culture and the German and native Germans themselves. It's extremely sad. Save man, woman, peace. Yeah, so I don't consider the dispossession of Native Americans by the white Europeans and by the Americans to be a genocide. A genocide is a systematic destruction of a people group who has been devalued and with the intention of destroying them usually outside of warfare. Or you are targeting a group during a war that is not part of the conflict. The Nazi targeting of the Jews during the Holocaust was a people group who were non-combatant in the war, but were targeted using the war power of the Germans. The Armenians were a non-combatant people during the World War I. They were targeted, exiled, and killed off by the Turks. The Soviet genocides, Mao's genocides, those all happened outside of war. So when I think of a genocide, I think of something that can happen during war, but doesn't happen during direct warfare. So the United States government and the European governments were at different times at war with different native tribes or a conglomeration of native tribes, and those tribes, and that was when the dispossession and mass murder occurred. I'm not saying it was okay. I'm not saying there was anything great about it. I'm saying I don't see it as a genocide, as a wiping out of these people after they've been systematically devalued and tagged to be destroyed. Now, there was a lot of attitudes of getting rid of the Native Americans as much as possible, especially in the United States in the late 19th century, but those attitudes were mutually shared by the natives. The natives were not just wanting the Americans to live peacefully with them. They hated Americans, and for many good reasons. They hated the encroachment upon their land, things like this, but this was not. Wounded Knee was a horrible massacre and an absolute black mark on American history. But it was not the United States deciding to go and kill a bunch of natives. It was, but it wasn't them doing it for genocidal intentions to wipe out every single Sioux. And if you look at it, the vast majority of Native Americans who died from diseases and exposure, not through warfare. I feel it has been a success. I don't know about that. I think that there's cultural decay that is already taking place in Western Europe, Simon. And I think when you have a culture that is weakened to its senses and not strong in the hearts of a native people, and you have a foreign culture that comes into that space that is very strong and prominent in the minds of those emigres, you have a culture clash where one is asleep and being rocked awake by this new one coming into its space. I think that's definitely what's happening. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of cultural decay in Germany and in Europe. I think there's cultural decay in the United States. And I think that there is cultural decay in many of the places. This man was from Saudi Arabia, many of the places that those immigrants came from. But it's a different type of cultural decay. It's a type of cultural decay that leads to all of the horrible things we hear about: human rights abuses, women abuses, abuses of LGBTQ people in the Middle East. So that's just my perspective on it. I'm suddenly out of breath. I think it might be a side effect still coming down from the flu and everything. Should we try to fight cultural decay and have cultural growth? I don't know what cultural growth is. I think that any culture, any country that has any sort of pride in who it is and who it wants to be and who wants an experiment to continue going and does not want to fundamentally transform itself into something new or be altered by changing tides, if it wants to retain some semblance of its history, it should go through a period of maybe a renaissance, a cultural renaissance. I think that would be huge. Yeah, yeah, AI, but I think AI will always be ephemeral, and I think we'll always be able to tell the difference. At least that's my hope. If AI does grow at the leaps and bounds that it does, is that human beings will always be able to tell the difference. Yeah, I would love to do that, but I don't even use VR. VR headsets bother me. They worry me because I'm worried I'm going to walk into things. I'm going to bump into them. I would only use it if I was sitting down, and yes, I would use it for that purpose of visiting a museum. So, anyways, yeah, the truth of them. I don't know about AI wanting to be God. I think there's a lot of fear about AI and a lot of fear of how it's integrated and how it's going to be used. But some of this is just Ludditism. Some of this is people being afraid of change and new things, and thinking that the fear of automation is as old as the Industrial Revolution. For 2 centuries now, there have been people who are usually scornfully called Luddites, based off of people in England who resisted the Industrial Revolution, went into factories and destroyed machines and mechanisms that were producing textiles and clothing. I think there's a strong predominance of Luddites still in this world who, whenever a new form of automation comes in that makes life easier for everybody else, is going to be afraid to one extent or another. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just in. I don't know if we are in a matrix. I think that we are in a situation where we have powerful technology that could be dangerous, but could also be very beneficial. So I'm keeping an open mind about it. I'm not going to be extremely stalwartly against it. But yeah, I'm okay with quiet. I needed quiet. It took me everything in my power to set that up. I was setting up Christmas lights, then I was setting this up, and yeah. I spent all day at the Verizon store getting this new phone, which I hope you are all enjoying the audio quality. Hopefully that has improved. It will improve even more with the microphone. And the lighting, I think, has improved. Yeah, the Luddites are a fascinating people. I think William Luddite was the name of a leader. And William Ludd was the name of a leader. I think he was a preacher, and he preached a sermon against machines, and he founded a group of people who would actually get clubs and other small weapons and go in and break machines and basically pillage factories and do everything they could in their power to undermine the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution still happened. They worried that the automation would take away jobs and opportunities. And it's true, automation always does this, but it also creates the needs for new jobs. Who's going to run the machine? Well, the machine took what I was doing, making clothes. Well, who's going to run the machine? Who's going to run all of these machines? Well, the machine took away my ability to put together this car part. Well, who's going to do maintenance on the machines? Who's going to make sure they don't break down? The people are always going to have some sort of need. So I don't think that we're going to be replaced by robots completely in the sense of the work that we do. I think there will always be a need for human labor in some form. I think the market demands it. Yes, it was in the 1800s. Interesting, you went to Manchester. How far is Manchester from York? or from London for that matter. I think it's close to London if I remember correctly. Yeah, I love that argument. We're all living in the Matrix. We we're not. We're living in our own world with our own problems, and I think people sometimes want to escape from that, so they want to have this idea that their brain's in vats. Engels and Turing. Wow, interesting. They did not have a statue of Karl Marx. Marx spent the last few years of his life in England and wrote Das Kapital, his most comprehensive economic work on the British labor market. He also ignored figures and information and economic data that contradicted some of his theories and basically said it didn't matter because he was right, but people don't like to bring that up. Karl Marx is an interesting guy, and Engels was his patron and best friend. And Engels was the benefactor of a wealthy father and business owner who bequeathed him a huge fortune, and he used that fortune to push the communist movement. So he actually paid for Marx whenever Marx needed him to do so. Marx never was able to really hold down a job, nor wanted to. He was much more into his philosophizing and things like that. So. Interesting. So it's between the two. That's really interesting, Simon. So yeah, Marx, Engels, Turing. Yeah, labor has a huge place in the heart of the British people, as it does in the heart of the American people. This sense of all of the workers uniting, yes, workers of the world uniting in order to not destroy what they had what they were doing, but to find a way to make it work better and work more for them. And yeah. Fascinating history there. I'll do a live stream lecture one day about the history of unions and their impact. I think I just did a video the other day I do a daily biography, like who was born today, daily passed away video, and a daily history video. And I did one on Samuel Gompers, the founder of the American Federation of Labor, which of course became the AFL-CIO. Rose Queen beauty pageants. Rose Queen for what? Oh, interesting. He was English? That's really cool. But yeah, Samuel Gompers was the founder of the American Federation of Labor, and the AFL merged later with I forget what it was called, the CIO, basically, and became the AFL-CIO, one of the most powerful unions in America. So if you want to learn anything about historical topics, if you have a social studies topic you would like to learn about, drop a question, comment, topic in the chat, and I will get to it. We're having a light night, and I'm enjoying that because I need it, and it gives me a chance to enjoy my new night light, and everything. In fact, this light's so good I can go like this and like this, and you still get a pretty good vision of me. Maybe too good of a vision of me. Maybe that's why we can't fill it up, Simon. Maybe I'm too in detail here, but. Yeah, it's my nightlight. And we don't have a lot of people here, and we're not too busy, so I can do this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Interesting. So it was started in the northwestern part of England and then came to the United States, which makes sense because most of the people from northwestern England who came to the United States were of Irish descent, and they settled in the South, and many of these beauty pageants are Southern in their origin. So that would make a lot of sense because a lot of the culture of the South, of the American South, that we know and question a lot of times, is based on people who came from Northern England, Scotland, and Ireland and migrated to America. So, yeah. So we were better before. Oh, David, I don't know about any updates about our little green friends. They're really not green; they're gray. But all right, I'll light it up. I'll see if anyone else. I'll give one light, but that looks kind of weird. That's kind of a half thing, and I don't want to look like Two-Face. So, that's interesting. They developed it based on research carried out in Manchester. Oh, by the way, speaking of England and all of its cultural impact on the world, be it through the Marx developing his theories there, or the people from Northern England coming to America and founding the American South and its culture and beauty pageants like the Rose Queen and things like that. Interestingly enough, this week marks the anniversary, of course, when Charles Dickens published The Christmas Carol in 1843. I believe that was on Wednesday. And obviously, The Christmas Carol is Dickens' beloved story of the redemption of Ebenezer Scrooge. And I made a video about that using iMovie instead of my usual CapCut. So go ahead and check that out and see if you have, if you like that form. It doesn't work well for shorts. I think I'll use it for long form videos and just do my regular CapCut, just stop motion image instead of a moving image, the Ken Burns effect, they call it. So, yeah. I enjoyed doing that. That was fun. But Charles Dickens obviously brought Christmas to the map in England in ways that it had never been before, making it more and more of a bigger holiday because of his writings with the Christmas Carol, which were serialized, meaning one part would come out, then another part would come out, then another part would come out. So you'd read the first part of the book, then you'd wait for the next one. It wasn't released in full. At least I don't think the Christmas Carol was. I know his larger novels, which were hundreds of pages long, which told the story of the poor in much greater detail, tended to do that. So, yeah. Um, yep, Landon, thank you. You're very welcome. Um, yeah, I'm not sure what aliens are. Angels, demons, visitors from outer space. I've talked about this before on the channel. I'm not a scientist. I am not a cosmologist, but I just have to say, in honor of Carl Sagan, whose birthday is today, because again, when you do a video about who was born today, you have to research stuff like this. It's a vast universe out there. We have an incredible ability in our solar system to actually have the exact right conditions to actually house human life that doesn't freeze, has an atmosphere and can breathe, doesn't breathe in poison, and is able to also not burn to death, and that is not moving too fast that we spin out of control, and is not moving too slow that we never make it there. We are in the perfect zone. And I'm sure there are other planets in the universe, in other galaxies, in other solar systems that are capable of that. And they very well may contain other forms of life, and we just don't know it. I think it's extraordinarily arrogant for us to say it's not possible. I think we have to say it is possible, and there is evidence that we might have been visited by species from those places. So who knows? Let's see. What sits at their front door does what it says on the tin? They're opening things that I don't know what you're talking about. You're currently, yes, this is our live stream Q&A part 1. Tomorrow, come back, ask more questions, all that great stuff. I don't know if there are other forms right here. I don't know if there are aliens among us, and some of us are, and we just don't know it. I'm not sure. I've heard people say that before. I'm not an expert on this. That's my opinion, David. That's the best I can give you right now. Yes. So remember to join us tomorrow for Saturday for our second part, then Sunday for our live stream lecture about the story and history of Christmas, and then Monday for our makeup live stream lecture where we'll be talking about the Roman Republic. Then enjoy your holiday and join us again next Friday as we start it all over again. China is the third largest country. The U.S. is only third if you count in the water. Oh, that's interesting. There are plenty of rivers, but the United States has a lot more. Yeah, you've got the Yangtze, I'm trying to remember the other one. Guangzhou. And the yellow is what the Yangtze is, and the Guangzhou, I think it's called. That's interesting. That's very interesting, Joao. Yeah, yeah. The U.S. has a lot more resources and a lot more access points than China does, but China has a huge amount of resources, a huge amount of farmland, a huge amount of crops. There's a lot of amazing things about Chinese topography, and you always have huge amounts of mountains at the south. At the end of China, in the south, you have the Himalayas, you have that natural barrier, its relationship to Nepal and India, you have Tibet, you have all of these regions in China. Interestingly enough, today is also the day when Macau gained its independence from Portugal just to be taken over by China in 1999, the same as the British did with Hong Kong. Just something you might find interesting. Well, the reason we would count in the ocean is because we're not always being technical when we apply the term, and no country you can't. We aren't really counting in the term of oceans into territory because people do not own oceans. No one owns the ocean. Although you could argue that during the 19th century, the British owned the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean because of how powerful their navy was, how strong it was, and how great their trading system was. But the truth of the matter is, no one can own an ocean. The oceans are shared international waters to one extent or another. Although saying you own it or this is this land, this water or that this country's waters or those countries' waters, that's true to some extent, and it's clear with rivers and seas partly, but not with oceans, not to that extent. Backyard, interesting. Now that's interesting, Underboss. So you're talking about a cryptid or a skinwalker. Those are very common. We hear occurrences about this. And again, when I, as a historian, something that always appeals to me when I hear stories about cryptids or skinwalkers or giants or any of these things or abnormal creatures, weird humanoids, I think of the fact that you hear about them in different, or wendigos, in different parts of the world. And when you hear about different species of them in different parts of the world, or different occurrences of them in different parts of the world at different times in history, you start to say to yourself, there has to be something true about this. This isn't just people seeing something or having something like that. So, yeah. Anyways, is Harvard the oldest? Yeah, Harvard is the oldest. It was originally founded for ministers and things like that. Puritans wanted it as a place to train up pastors in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 1630s, and then Yale was started in Connecticut, I think in 1701 or 1698, very close, but yeah. Is it Stanford? Is it better than Stanford or UPenn and UPenn? Well, that's depending on who you ask when it comes to Harvard, because the truth of the matter is Harvard is considered the gold standard of universities in the United States. It's getting a really bad reputation right now for two reasons. One, what I talked about on the live stream last week. The rise of what we call woke ideology has made a lot of people not want to send their children to Harvard, not want to give the endowments to Harvard, and they felt that Harvard has lost its prestige and become more about critical theory and being woke and relevant than actually teaching people important at the highest possible level with the most important academic experience possible. But the other reason, and that plagues many universities and not just Harvard, and the other reason that also plagues many universities is the rise of anti-Semitism on campus since the October 7th attacks, where a lack of balance, nuance, or understanding has permeated colleges, shockingly enough, where people are not able to think critically about things, and these kids go through schools all their lives and do not learn how to think critically about things, do not understand that there are two sides to every story and how to interpret those two sides. That's strange and unnerving and should be to a lot of people. But Stanford, UPenn, Harvard, they all got a lot of flack for how they handled the anti-Semitism on their campuses. So a lot of these universities are really, really struggling. Yes, the cryptids, we don't know what they are. And that's why we call it cryptid, because something is encrypted is unknown. Yeah, I agree. It's not a fair way to measure. Yeah, the moon. Yeah, supposedly these are associations with the moons. You have obviously the legend of Lupus, the Lupine of King Lupus or King Lupine, who was a Greek king who turned himself into a wolf, and we get the wolfmen and werewolves from that. That's another cryptid. Did you know Rio was the capital of Portugal for a few years? Yes, I did know that because the Portuguese government in the 1810s was threatened by Napoleon, whose brother Charles was in charge of Spain, and so they fled. King John III and his family fled and held their royal court in Rio de Janeiro. They were so unpopular that after Napoleon was defeated and they were able to go back to Portugal, the Brazilians asked his son, Dom Pedro, to take over Brazil and kicked him out of power. Yes, and Harvard is overrated and overpriced, very much so, Donna. The Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil to flee Napoleon. Yeah, they wanted to get away from Napoleon because Napoleon had put his brother in charge of Spain as a puppet, and then Portugal, which was allied to Britain, which was Napoleon's greatest enemy, went to war with Spain. And Napoleon, who was helping to prop up his brother, did everything in his power to destroy the Portuguese and have Spain take over them. So, what is the really old pact between? That's I think it's called the Eternal Alliance, and it's lasted for it's 1277. That's 747 years. 747 years we've had that, but it's great to see you, TaylorMade. Yeah, the most active treaty in the world, the longest one ever, longest alliance. So, and that has kept Portugal and England, despite the fact that they have both been huge maritime presences, despite the fact that Portugal became Catholic, stayed Catholic, while England became Protestant. That has kept them going, and it has allowed them to ally against the Spanish and the French on different occasions. It's very, very important. The TUI holiday package for 190 to Algarve in Portugal. That's interesting. So even traveling expenses to Portugal is easier. Why is there an Antarctic treaty? Okay, this is a good one, Underboss. So Antarctica is the seventh continent and really doesn't get discovered until the early 1910s. And then during the Cold War, after the end of World War II, after Germany was divided, and you have the eastern part of Europe and huge parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia, and of course the Soviet Union and Russia are communist. You have that versus the United States and the Western democracies such as Great Britain, France, West Germany, most of Central America. There's the big question of Canada. What happens to the seventh continent now that you have the United States and the Soviet Union trying to outdo each other technologically, economically, socially, politically, and militarily through indirect conflicts like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the war in Afghanistan when the Soviets invaded in the 80s. So because you have all of these international conflicts and you have this international competition where the United States and the Soviet Union are trying to see who can outdo each other better, they basically the UN decides to make Antarctica a neutral continent that nobody can claim for themselves and that will always be one untouched, basically. The United States doesn't get to claim part of Antarctica. The Soviets don't get to claim part of Antarctica. There's not going to be a scramble for Antarctica. It doesn't have natural resources. Well, it does, but it's not easy to get. And B, it doesn't have native populations. So colonizing it like Africa or the Americas was colonized doesn't seem very practical, especially because of its frigid conditions. But also conquering it in the midst of a Cold War, you don't want to start a nuclear war that could destroy several other continents over sparse land in Antarctica. So I don't know how credible and trustworthy he is. Amundsen was the first man to reach it. It's interesting with Robert Byrd, or I think it was Robert Byrd. No, I'm thinking of the American senator. I would have to read it to know for sure. Brazil was the most obedient European colony. We didn't have newspapers, universities, or parliaments. We had nothing before the royals came fleeing. Yes, and the presence of the royals was enough to disturb the Brazilian population enough that despite all of their centuries of loyalty, the only country in South America to be colonized by someone not named Spain, at least at that time, that's fascinating that they became their own independent country. They wanted their independence from the Portuguese after centuries of loyalty to the Portuguese. It is pretty incredible. So is Admiral Byrd credible? I'll have to look more into it. I've heard some things that sound credible, and I've heard some things that sound way crazy. Why did Judea declare war on Germany in 1933? You mean Israel? You mean Palestine? Because it was called Palestine then. It was the Mandate of Palestine. The Israelis had no love for the Nazis. Hitler had no love for the Jews, but he actually used Christianity as a front. He found the message of self-sacrifice and Christian love to be weak, so he tried to revise that and use the Lutheran Church and manipulate it, and he was resisted by people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But Hitler had one religion that he did find to be interesting, to be admirable, and that was Islam. He liked the violent trends in Islam, and he found it to be an aggressive and assertive religion. And if you learn anything about fascism, you learn that fascists really respect aggression. Mussolini wasn't sure about Hitler and the Übermensch and the master race, but he came to like it because he respected Hitler's aggression, or he came to accept it at the very least, because he wasn't an Aryan, but he really, really liked Hitler's aggressiveness. Hitler liked the aggressiveness of the Muslims, and he teamed up with the Grand Mufti, who was the leader of of what we would call the Palestinian, or it was really the Arabs who lived in that area, those people, and that man helped turn over Jews in the Middle East, or tried to help turn over Jews in the Middle East to the Nazis. I don't know if you know that, but John, I will Google that, but I hope you Google what I just said and fact check it, because I would hate to be wrong. But if I'm wrong, it's okay. I'll just learn and move on. But yes, Hitler had worked with the Grand Muftis and the Arabs to try to attack, to persecute the Middle Eastern Jews known as Mizrahi. So, yeah, that's not the way to make up your mind, Underboss. You want to be able to learn from different perspectives. I think he means there was the Jewish business in America. Probably, my guess is that if any industry or business wanted to go after the Nazis, it was because of Nazi propaganda and their hatred of the Jews. And in 1933, that wasn't fully realized. In 1935, that wasn't fully realized. In 1938, that wasn't fully realized. In 1940, that wasn't fully realized. This was a step-by-step process. It doesn't happen overnight. And to say it can't happen here is foolishness. What about the Balfour Declaration? You're never too late, Ryan. We're always so glad to have you. The Balfour Declaration. So Lord Alfred Balfour was the British. There's much made of this 2-paragraph document, which is all it is. If you want to read a nice historical primary source in like under 5 minutes, go read the Balfour Declaration. Lord Alfred Balfour, who was the British Foreign Secretary after World War I, at the end of World War I, basically said the Jewish people have a right to live in the Holy Land, aka Palestine. That's all it said, that there should be a Jewish state run by Jews in the Holy Land, okay, and that should be Jewish, and that was the basis for it was an endorsement of what was called Zionism, which was a rising movement at that time that basically believed that the Jews deserved their own country. And this had started in the late 1800s, especially in Eastern Europe, where the Jews were heavily persecuted, especially in the Russian Empire, where anti-Semitism and killing Jews was legal. It was called a pogrom. It wouldn't happen every day, but it would happen from time to time, and basically there would be no consequences. It was basically treated like it was legal. So the truth of the matter is that this persecution of the Jews led many of them to seek new lives. Many of them went to the United States, but if they wanted their own state of their own livelihood, they knew that the only real place they could ever go was Israel, was their homeland of thousands of years. And so the Balfour Declaration recognized that was happening, that it was good that it was happening, and that the Jews deserved a state in the land. And that is why the British who were mandating the government of the Palestinian region after World War I, after the Ottoman Empire fell apart, decided to divide it between the Arabs and the Jews, the Muslims and the Jews. And that is the division that I can't even really blame the British here, that in 1948, when the Israelis took the land up, that the Palestinians and the Arabs had not agreed to, they instantly attacked them. Then the Jews kicked them all out of a bunch of land, in the West Bank especially, and defeated them in the Arab-Israeli War, and this was right after they became a nation in 1948. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were expelled from the Middle East because of this, and then we have war after war after war, and look at where we are now. We're still in a war. So, anyways, John, I hope I've told you a little bit about the Balfour Declaration. Thank you, Underboss. That made my day hearing that. Who are the most scapegoated people after the Jews? Oh my goodness gracious, Simon. An interesting question. Who are the most scapegoated? I think Eastern Europeans get a lot of difficulty first from other Eastern Europeans, then from Central Europeans like the Germans, and then look at they were treated horrible in America. Look at the Poles. Poles maybe might be the most scapegoated people after the Jews. Interestingly enough, in European history, despite the fact that they are far from perfect in their anti-Semitism chart, if you compare Poland to the other European countries, Poland is the best. Poland treated the Jews better than any other European country, probably because they also had felt some of the similar scapegoating problems. I mean, Poles have been treated terrible throughout their entire history. They have been pushed around and beaten around by different groups continually. And many Eastern Europeans have been the same. And the Roman people, the Gypsies, that might be the other great scapegoated people, blamed for all sorts of problems that they didn't cause. So let me see, where are we here? Judaism is one of the most fascinating subjects. Yes, I find it to be an amazing religion. It's a religion, a culture, and a history all together. Thoughts on the possibility of several comic book characters in their original appearance becoming public domain? That would be cool. I mean, then we could call this the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man History Channel, which is where I get the name for the channel from Spider-Man, my favorite superhero. How's your opinions on the USS Liberty? Are you talking, John? Are you talking about the Philadelphia experiment? Is that what you're referring to? Because I'm not. Other than that, I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to. If I'm correct, you're referring to the Philadelphia experiment, which is not a pleasant thing to read about, and is conspiratorial to some extent. What is the longest conflict and what was the shortest war? I heard of one lasted only 30 minutes, but I forgot who it was. I think there was a war in Korea where there was a misunderstanding about a border crossing, and that was cleaned up really quickly. The longest war, oh geez, I don't know. There are wars that have gone on for centuries. The one that comes to my mind is the 100 Years' War, 116 years of Britain and England and France trying to destroy each other. That basically kicked England out of France, made it turn its attention elsewhere, and made France the predominant power in mainland Europe. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the longest war. There are some wars that went on for centuries. Most wars go on for a few years. That's an interesting average. And if you look at history throughout places, most wars go on for a few years. God help Jew. Yes, that is so sad, isn't it, Simon? Because Poland was where all the Jews went when they were kicked out of other European countries, and Poland is where the Nazis built the death camps, Treblinka and Dachau. Talk about Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That is where the U.S. kept prisoners of war for the longest time, and especially terrorists who were on the terror watch list, and basically denied them human rights and practiced enhanced interrogation, basically torture, in order to try to get information from them. It became one of the most it is one of the most controversial places, and basically has been on the check mark for a lot of people to close for a long time in American politics. It has become a political issue in and of itself, which really reflects the deeper fight between the right and the left concerning prisoner rights. Oh, I don't know about that. The Israel attack on an American ship. Israel bombed a U.S. ship. I did not know that. Was that during the 67 Six-Day War? I don't know what the reason for that would be. But the Philadelphia experiment is highly fascinating. Yeah. Well, the United States was very patient, has been very patient with Israel, and is being patient again. Okay, everyone has a favorite live-action Spider-Man actor. So that's a tough one. McGuire is the one I grew up with, Ryan, and McGuire I think, is the best. But everybody loves Tom Holland. He's so funny, and nobody's gonna pick Andrew. Can you talk about the 3 Mile accident? No, because I don't know what that is. Interesting. So there's definitely a lot of plot armor from the U.S., a lot of support for Israel from the U.S. So that's why I probably don't know as much about it. Dachau was in Germany. You're right. I'm thinking Treblinka and Buchenwald? I believe we're in Poland. We're in Poland. Dachau is Germany. You're right. Thank you very much. I'll have to get back with you on the shorter war. That's not what I was thinking about, but okay, please be sure to do. Do I like X-Men? I do. I do. I just never got into it that much. I like them more as an idea than I do as a movie. The Anglo-Zanzibar War. Interesting. 30-minute war. I'll have to read more about that. Was the Mongolian Empire not a real empire in the modern sense? Too spread out. No, it was a real empire, ruled by the Khaganate, the Great Khan, Genghis Khan. Khan is not his name. Genghis Khan is a title. It means the Great King. His real name was Temujin. And the Mongol Empire was an empire that he built up, and his son, and his grandson, and eventually it got so big and overextended, they divided it into 4 different smaller empires, also called khanates or kingdoms. The death camps were all, so that's Auschwitz, were all in Poland. A nuclear accident in Pennsylvania. See, this is why I love this, because I learn about things that I didn't know about. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, which I have heard of, but I didn't know it was only 30 minutes. The Liberty experience, where the Israelis attacked a U.S. ship in '67, and the Lavon affair. Again, not something I'm familiar with, but also the 3 Mile accident, a nuclear meltdown in Pennsylvania. If you call Mongolia an empire, then you have to call Comancheria one as well. With the Comanches, a huge network of hunt and trade. They did, but they didn't have a ruler. They didn't have a centralized government or an army. They were a little bit more disorganized, and they had less centralized power. Yeah, I think that I'm going to make a Substack for the channel. I'm going to publish some of my historical writings there. Yeah, John, I agree. I don't call it the Macedonian Empire. I call it Alexander's Empire because he created an empire, he ruled it for a little bit, then he died. And after that, it became 4 different kingdoms. All of them could be empires again. Interesting, the Levon affair. I'll have to look into that. I'm not totally surprised. That sounds like something the Mossad might have done. Is the dead hand system a real thing in Russia? From what I know, no. And the emu war, yes, in Australia, where people were fighting over emus. Which, if you're going to pick a bird to fight about, why that one? I just don't know. Anyways, we are over an hour at this point, and I have caught up on the chat because we had a lighter night, but that was fun. I think we needed that. Hope you guys enjoyed the new lighting, the new features, the new audio and visual display, and all of that. I hope it was a better, more integrative experience for everybody, and you guys learned something about history. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe. Join the channel, become a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as subscribing, and we appreciate everyone for joining us so much, and we will see you again tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. I will take one last question, my last call, and then I will see you all tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern. Tartarian Empire, what are your thoughts on that someday? Well, the Tartarian Empire, well, basically the Golden Horde conquers Central Asia, and then they kind of break apart into several different states in modern-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and the Russians actually swallow them up slowly but surely over the centuries, as do the Ottomans. But the conquest of that dying Tatarian Empire is a huge goal of the Russian czars of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. So, yeah, something that really doesn't get fully wrapped up until Catherine the Great at the end of the 18th century. But yes, it's a bit earlier, an hour earlier tomorrow. I'm looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much for everybody who came and held the torch and asked the good questions. And yes, happy holidays to all. We are in the holiday season, and I will see you all tomorrow. Really looking forward to it. Have a great night now. Bye-bye.